Marcus Rivera wiped the sweat from his forehead as the afternoon sun beat down on the small garage he had inherited from his father. The metal roof trapped the heat like an oven, and the single ceiling fan only moved the warm air around. His hands were black with engine grease, and his worn coveralls had seen better days. The garage sat on the edge of downtown, squeezed between a laundromat and a convenience store that had been robbed twice in the past month. At 32, Marcus had spent more than half his life under the hood of cars. His father had taught him everything about engines when he was just a boy, and Marcus could diagnose most problems just by listening to how a car sounded when it pulled up. The neighborhood wasn't fancy, but people trusted him. He charged fair prices and always did honest work. His customers were working families, college students, and elderly folks on fixed incomes who couldn't afford the high prices at dealership service centers. The garage was small but organized. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, and Marcus kept detailed records of every repair in a worn notebook. He had dreams of expanding someday, maybe opening a larger shop in a better part of town, but money was always tight. Most months he barely made enough to cover rent and keep food on the table for himself and his younger sister Maria, who was studying nursing at the community college. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Marcus was replacing brake pads on a 10-year-old Honda when he heard the distinctive rumble of a high-performance engine struggling outside. The sound wasn't right. It was missing and sputtering like a thoroughbred horse limping. He stepped out of the garage, wiping his hands on a shop rag, and saw something that made him stop in his tracks. A gleaming red Ferrari 488 Spider sat at the curb, its engine making sounds that would make any car lover wince. The driver was a man in his 50s, wearing what looked like a $5,000 suit. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and he wore a watch that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. The man was talking rapidly on his phone, his voice getting louder and more frustrated by the minute. "I don't care what the appointment book says," the man shouted into his phone. "I need this car fixed now. Do you understand what now means? I have a board meeting in 2 hours and I'm not showing up in some rental car that screams failure." Marcus recognized the type immediately. He had seen plenty of wealthy customers over the years, though usually they drove past his garage on their way to the fancy dealerships across town. This man had the bearing of someone who was used to getting his way, someone who threw money at problems until they disappeared. The Ferrari's engine coughed and died completely. The man tried turning the key several times, but nothing happened, except a weak clicking sound. His face turned red as he continued yelling at whoever was on the other end of the phone call. Marcus could see other people on the sidewalk starting to stare and point at the expensive car that had broken down in their working-class neighborhood. After hanging up his phone with obvious anger, the man got out of the Ferrari and looked around, desperately. His eyes landed on Marcus, who was still standing in the doorway of his garage. The man's expression went from desperate to dismissive in about 2 seconds as he took in Marcus's appearance, the greasy coveralls, the small garage, the neighborhood. But desperation won out over pride. The man walked over, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the cracked sidewalk. "You?" he said, pointing at Marcus like he was summoning a servant. "Do you know anything about cars, or do you just change oil?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "I know a thing or two about engines. What seems to be the problem?" "What seems to be the problem?" the man repeated mockingly. "The problem is that my car is worth more than this entire block and it won't start. I called the Ferrari dealership, but they can't see me until tomorrow. Tomorrow, as if I have time to wait around for incompetent service departments." The man gestured impatiently at his car. "Can you fix it or not? And don't even think about trying to overcharge me just because you see an expensive car. I didn't get where I am by letting people take advantage of me." Marcus walked over to the Ferrari, admiring the sleek lines despite the owner's attitude. He had worked on exotic cars before, though not many. Engines were engines, whether they were in a 20-year-old pickup truck or a $250,000 sports car. He popped the hood and immediately saw the problem. "Looks like your fuel pump is failing," Marcus said after listening to the engine for less than a minute. "I can hear it struggling to maintain pressure. Could also be a clogged fuel filter, but my guess is the pump itself is going bad." The man scoffed. "Fuel pump? That's your expert diagnosis? I could have gotten that from a YouTube video. Look, I don't have time for guessing games. Either you can fix it properly, or I need to find someone who actually knows what they're doing with high-performance vehicles. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. I can fix it, but I'd need to order the part. Ferrari fuel pumps aren't exactly something I keep in stock. It would take at least until tomorrow morning to get it delivered. Tomorrow morning? The man looked at Marcus like he had suggested waiting until next year. Do you have any idea who I am? I'm Jonathan Blackstone. I own Blackstone Industries. We have contracts with half the Fortune 500 companies in this country. I don't wait for parts to be delivered to some back-alley garage. Marcus had heard of Blackstone Industries. They were one of the largest consulting firms in the city, the kind of company that helped other companies fire people to increase profits. Jonathan Blackstone was exactly the kind of person Marcus had imagined would run a place like that. Well, Mr. Blackstone, Marcus said, his patience finally starting to wear thin. Unless you've got a spare Ferrari fuel pump in your back pocket, waiting is your only option. That, or you could try starting it with positive thinking and executive privilege. Jonathan's face darkened. Excuse me? Did you just... He stopped himself, clearly not used to anyone talking back to him. You know what? Fine. Order your part. But if this isn't fixed first thing tomorrow morning, I'll make sure everyone in this city knows that this garage is run by an incompetent amateur who thinks he can work on cars he has no business touching. With that threat hanging in the air, Jonathan called for an expensive rideshare service and disappeared, leaving his $250,000 car parked outside Marcus's humble garage like a bright red reminder of the gap between their worlds. After Jonathan Blackstone left in his rideshare, Marcus stood staring at the Ferrari for a long moment. The car looked out of place on his street, like a diamond ring dropped in a parking lot. Neighbors had started gathering around to get a closer look, and Marcus could hear whispered conversations about the expensive car and the angry man in the suit. Mrs. Chen from the laundromat came over, shaking her head. That man was very rude to you, Marcus. You should have told him to take his fancy car somewhere else. She had watched the whole interaction through her window and clearly didn't approve of how Jonathan had treated him. It's okay, Mrs. Chen, Marcus replied, though his pride still stung from the encounter. His money spends the same as anyone else's. But even as he said it, Marcus wasn't sure he wanted Jonathan's business. There was something about the way the man had looked at him like Marcus was beneath his notice that sat wrong. Marcus called his usual parts supplier, but as expected, they didn't have Ferrari fuel pumps in stock. The earliest they could get one delivered was Thursday afternoon. When he called 2 other suppliers, he got the same answer. Ferrari parts weren't exactly common in his part of town. That evening, Marcus found himself thinking about the problem differently. He had been working on cars long enough to know that sometimes the obvious diagnosis wasn't the complete picture. The fuel pump symptoms were clear, but something about the way the Ferrari had been running bothered him. It wasn't just fuel starvation. There had been an irregular pattern to the engine's struggles, something more complex than a simple pump failure. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts about engines from his father, who had been one of the best mechanics in the city before a heart attack took him away when Marcus was 25. An engine tells you stories, his father used to say. You just have to know how to listen. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the garage early and took another look at the Ferrari. This time, he didn't just listen to the engine. He connected his diagnostic computer and started pulling data from the car's sophisticated systems. What he found made him frown. The fuel pressure readings were indeed low, but there were also irregularities in the ignition timing and some strange electrical signals that didn't match a simple fuel pump failure. Marcus spent the next 2 hours tracing electrical connections and testing components. The Ferrari's engine bay was cramped and complex, with systems layered on top of each other like a 3-dimensional puzzle. But gradually, a picture began to emerge. The fuel pump wasn't the primary problem. It was failing because something else was causing it to work harder than it should. Deep in the engine's computer system, Marcus found fault codes that most mechanics would have overlooked. The car's sophisticated fuel management system was getting confused by a failing sensor that monitored air intake temperature. When the sensor gave incorrect readings, the computer tried to compensate by adjusting the fuel mixture, which put extra strain on the fuel pump. Over time, this had caused the Pump to wear out prematurely. It was an elegant problem, really. The kind of thing that would stump most mechanics because they would focus on the obvious symptom instead of looking for the underlying cause. Marcus had seen similar issues in other high-tech vehicles, though never in a car this expensive. The air intake temperature sensor was a $40 part that Marcus actually had in stock. It would take him about an hour to replace it and reprogram the car's computer to recognize the new sensor. But there was still the matter of the worn fuel pump. Even with the sensor fixed, the pump would likely fail completely within a few hundred miles. Marcus faced a dilemma. He could do the quick fix and get the car running again, which would solve Jonathan's immediate problem. But he knew the pump would fail soon, probably at the worst possible moment. The honest thing to do would be to replace both parts, but he didn't have the pump and couldn't get it until the next day. Around noon, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of an expensive car pulling up outside. Through the window, he saw Jonathan Blackstone climbing out of a black Mercedes sedan that probably served as his backup vehicle. The man looked just as impatient and self-important as he had the day before. "Well?" Jonathan demanded as he strode into the garage. "Is it fixed? I have a lunch meeting with the mayor in 30 minutes and I need my car back." Marcus wiped his hands on a shop rag before answering. "I found the problem and it's not what I thought yesterday. Your fuel pump is failing, but that's a symptom, not the cause. The real issue is a faulty air intake sensor that's been making your engine's computer think it needs more fuel than it actually does. Over time, this has put extra stress on the fuel pump." Jonathan looked impatient. "I don't need a technical lecture. Just tell me if you can fix it or not." "I can fix the sensor problem right now," Marcus continued. "That will get your car running again. But the fuel pump is still going to fail, probably within the next week or two. The proper repair would be to replace both parts, but I don't have the fuel pump in stock." Jonathan's expression suggested he thought Marcus was trying to upsell him. "Of course you want to replace more parts. That's how you people make money, isn't it? Fix one thing, then claim something else is broken." The comment stung, partly because Marcus knew there were dishonest mechanics who did exactly that. But he had built his reputation on straight dealing and honest diagnoses. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm not trying to sell you anything you don't need. I'm telling you what's wrong with your car. You can choose to fix just the sensor if you want. It'll get you running again today. But don't come back here blaming me when the fuel pump dies on you next week." Jonathan checked his expensive watch impatiently. "Fine. Fix whatever you can fix right now. I don't have time to wait around for parts." He paused, then added with a condescending smile, "And let's be honest, a mechanic in a place like this probably doesn't have the expertise to work on a car like mine anyway. I'll take it to the Ferrari dealership next week for a proper inspection." Marcus felt his temper flare, but he kept his voice level. "Your choice, Mr. Blackstone. Give me 45 minutes, and you'll be back on the road." As Marcus worked on replacing the sensor, he could hear Jonathan making phone calls in the waiting area, his voice carrying the same arrogant tone he used with everyone. He talked about people like they were numbers on a spreadsheet, discussing layoffs and cost-cutting measures with casual indifference. It reminded Marcus why he preferred working on cars to dealing with people like Jonathan Blackstone. When Marcus finished the repair, the Ferrari started immediately and ran smoothly. The engine purred like it was supposed to, without any of the stuttering or missing from the day before. Jonathan seemed surprised by how well it ran, though he tried not to show it. "How much?" Jonathan asked, pulling out a leather wallet thick with credit cards. $85 for the part and labor," Marcus replied. Jonathan looked genuinely shocked. "That's it? For fixing a Ferrari?" "I told you it was just a sensor," Marcus said with a shrug. $40 for the part, $45 for labor. Same rate I charge everyone." Jonathan handed over a $100 bill without asking for change, which Marcus figured was the closest thing to a thank you he was going to get. As the CEO climbed back into his Ferrari, he rolled down the window. "You know," Jonathan said, with the same condescending tone, "you should really consider referring exotic car work to someone more qualified. Cars like this require a level of expertise that—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Marcus watched the Ferrari drive away, its engine running perfectly. He had a feeling he would be seeing Jonathan Blackstone again sooner than the man expected. 5 days later, Marcus was installing new tires on a delivery van when he heard a familiar sound outside. The Ferrari's engine was making the same struggling, sputtering noise as before, but this time it sounded worse. Much worse. Marcus looked up from his work to see the red sports car limping down the street, barely managing to stay running. The car died completely just as it reached Marcus's garage, coasting to a stop in almost the exact same spot where it had broken down the week before. This time, when Jonathan Blackstone got out of the car, he looked different. His usual arrogant confidence had been replaced by frustration and something that might have been embarrassment. Marcus walked out of the garage, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He didn't say anything at first, just listened as Jonathan tried, several times, to restart the Ferrari. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch, making the weak, clicking sound of a fuel pump that had finally given up completely. "Before you say anything," Jonathan began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone, "I took it to the Ferrari dealership like I planned. They kept it for 3 days and charged me $1,800. They said they fixed the fuel system and that it was good as new." Marcus raised an eyebrow but still didn't speak. He had learned that sometimes the best response was to let people finish digging their own holes. Jonathan continued, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "It ran fine for 2 days after I picked it up. Then yesterday it started acting up again. This morning it barely made it out of my driveway." He paused, clearly struggling with what he was about to admit. "They want another $2,000 to properly diagnose the intermittent fuel system failure and said it might take a week. And now you're back here," Marcus said simply. "Look," Jonathan said, his carefully maintained composure starting to crack. "I may have been hasty in my judgment the other day. The dealership clearly didn't understand the problem as well as they claimed to. Would you be willing to take another look at it?" Marcus considered the request. Part of him wanted to refuse, to let Jonathan deal with the consequences of his dismissive attitude. But another part of him, the part that had been raised by a father, who believed in helping people regardless of how they treated you, won out. "Pop the hood," Marcus said. As soon as Marcus connected his diagnostic computer to the Ferrari, he could see what had happened. The dealership had indeed replaced the fuel pump, installing a brand new one that cost probably 8 times what Marcus would have charged. But they had completely missed the faulty air intake sensor that had caused the original problem. "They replaced the fuel pump," Marcus explained as he worked. "But they didn't fix the underlying issue. The faulty sensor is still sending bad information to the engine computer, which means the new fuel pump is working just as hard as the old one. Given how expensive their replacement pump probably was, it might last a little longer, but it's going to fail eventually too." Jonathan watched Marcus work, his expression thoughtful. "So you were right the first time. It wasn't really the fuel pump that was the main problem. The pump was worn out," Marcus clarified, "but only because the bad sensor was making it work overtime. Fix the sensor and the pump lasts normal lifespan. Replace the pump without fixing the sensor and you'll be replacing pumps forever." As Marcus worked on replacing the sensor, Jonathan surprised him by actually trying to make conversation instead of just barking orders or making phone calls. "How long have you been working on cars?" he asked. "Since I was 12, Marcus replied, not looking up from his work. "My father owned this garage before me. He taught me that every car has its own personality, its own way of telling you what's wrong. You just have to know how to listen." "Must be nice having that kind of knowledge passed down," Jonathan said quietly. "My father was never around much. Too busy building his business empire. I learned everything I know about success from books and business school." Marcus glanced up, surprised by the admission. For a moment, Jonathan sounded almost human, instead of like a walking corporate handbook. "The thing is," Jonathan continued, "I've built my entire career on being right, on having the answers, on knowing more than everyone else in the room. It's hard to admit when you're wrong about something, especially something you thought was beneath your expertise." Marcus finished, installing the new sensor, and started the process of reprogramming the Ferrari's computer. "Being wrong isn't the problem," he said. "Staying wrong because you're too proud to learn something new, that's the problem. The Ferrari started on the first try, its engine purring smoothly. Marcus let it run for several minutes, watching the diagnostic readings to make sure everything was working properly. All the numbers looked good. "How much do I owe you?" Jonathan asked, reaching for his wallet. "Same as last time," Marcus replied. $85. Jonathan stared at him. "But you just fixed a problem that a Ferrari dealership couldn't solve, even after they charged me $1,800 and kept my car for 3 days." Marcus shrugged. "Price is based on the work, not on how much the dealership overcharged you." Jonathan handed over a $100 bill again, but this time he seemed to be thinking about something. "Can I ask you a question? Why do you work in a garage like this? I mean, you obviously have skills that could get you a job at any high-end shop in the city. You could probably make 3 times what you make here." Marcus considered the question while he cleaned his tools. "This is my neighborhood. These are my people. Mrs. Chen next door brings me homemade soup when I work late. Tommy from the convenience store saves me the good coffee when he knows I've been here all night working on someone's car, so they can get to work the next morning. The Gonzalez family has been bringing their cars here since my father opened this place." He gestured around the small garage. "Sure, I could probably make more money somewhere else, but money isn't everything. My customers trust me because no, I'm not trying to get rich off their car troubles. I'm trying to help them get back on the road safely and affordably." Jonathan nodded slowly, as if Marcus had just explained something he had never considered before. "That's an interesting way to look at business success." "Different kind of success," Marcus replied. "Your success is measured in profits and market share. Mine is measured in whether Mrs. Rodriguez can afford to keep her 20-year-old Honda running so she can get to her cleaning jobs. Different doesn't make it wrong." As Jonathan prepared to leave, he turned back one more time. "You know, I owe you an apology for the way I acted last week. I made assumptions about you based on where you work instead of what you know. That was wrong of me." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." Jonathan climbed into his Ferrari, which was running better than it had in months. As he prepared to drive away, he rolled down the window one last time. "If you ever decide you want a change of scenery," he said, "Blackstone Industries could use someone who can diagnose complex problems and fix them efficiently. I have a feeling you'd be good at more than just cars." Marcus watched the Ferrari drive away, this time with its engine running perfectly. He had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time he saw Jonathan Blackstone, but he suspected their next encounter would be very different from the first two. 3 weeks passed without any sign of Jonathan Blackstone or his Ferrari. Marcus had almost forgotten about the unusual encounter when a black town car pulled up outside his garage on a Wednesday afternoon. The driver, a professional-looking woman in a business suit, got out and approached Marcus with a polite smile. "Are you Marcus Rivera?" she asked, extending her hand. "My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm Mr. Blackstone's executive assistant. He'd like to invite you to lunch tomorrow if you're available." Marcus looked down at his grease-stained coveralls and then back at the woman. "Lunch? What for?" "Mr. Blackstone has a business proposition he'd like to discuss with you," Sarah replied, professionally. "He specifically requested that I tell you it has nothing to do with your garage or asking you to work somewhere else. He just wants to run an idea past you." Marcus was curious despite himself. "What kind of idea?" "I'm afraid I don't have those details," Sarah said. "But he asked me to tell you that he's learned something about looking at problems differently, and he thinks you might be interested in what he has in mind." The next day, Marcus found himself in an upscale restaurant downtown, feeling distinctly out of place in his best khaki pants and the button-down shirt he usually saved for church. The restaurant was the kind of place where the menu didn't have prices, and the waiters spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the chef's vision. Jonathan arrived exactly on time, looking every inch the successful CEO in another perfectly tailored suit. But his demeanor was completely different from their previous encounters. Instead of the arrogant dismissiveness Marcus remembered, Jonathan seemed genuinely pleased to see him. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Jonathan said, standing to shake hands. "I wasn't sure you'd accept the invitation." "I'll be honest," Marcus replied as they sat down. "I'm curious about what this is all about." Jonathan smiled. Direct as always, I like that. He paused as the waiter brought menus. How's the Ferrari running, by the way? I wouldn't know, Marcus said with a slight grin. Haven't seen you broken down outside my garage lately. Touché, Jonathan laughed. It's running perfectly, in case you were wondering. Better than it has since I bought it, actually. After they ordered lunch, Jonathan leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. I've been thinking a lot about our conversations, Marcus. About different ways of solving problems, different definitions of success. It's made me reconsider some things about how I run my business. Marcus waited for him to continue, unsure where this was heading. Blackstone Industries specializes in helping companies become more efficient and profitable, Jonathan explained. Usually that means finding ways to cut costs, streamline operations, eliminate redundancies. We're very good at it, and our clients pay us well for that expertise. Sounds like what you'd expect from a consulting company, Marcus said neutrally. Right. But here's the thing, Jonathan continued. We're so focused on the bottom line that we sometimes miss the bigger picture. We see a department that's not generating immediate profit, so we recommend eliminating it. We see a process that takes extra time, so we cut it out. We see people as numbers on a spreadsheet instead of human beings with families and dreams. Marcus was starting to understand where this might be going. And you think that's a problem? I think it's the same mistake I made with your diagnosis of my car, Jonathan admitted. I focused on the obvious symptom instead of understanding the underlying system. I saw a small garage in a working-class neighborhood and assumed that meant inferior service. I didn't bother to understand what you actually knew or what you could accomplish. The food arrived, but neither man seemed particularly interested in eating. They were too engaged in the conversation. So what does this have to do with me? Marcus asked. Jonathan took a breath before answering. I want to start a new division of Blackstone Industries. Instead of just cutting costs and eliminating what seems unnecessary, I want to focus on diagnosing what's really wrong with struggling companies and fixing the underlying problems. Like troubleshooting an engine problem, Marcus said, beginning to see the parallel. Exactly like troubleshooting an engine problem, Jonathan confirmed. And I want you to head up this new division. Marcus nearly choked on his water. Me, I'm a mechanic, not a business consultant. You're a problem solver, Jonathan corrected. You have an ability to see past the obvious symptoms and identify the real cause of complex issues. You understand that quick fixes don't work if you don't address the underlying problem. And most importantly, you understand that success isn't just about maximizing short-term profits. Marcus shook his head. I don't know anything about running a business or managing people or any of that corporate stuff. You can learn the corporate stuff, Jonathan said. I can't teach someone how to think the way you do. The way you approached my car problem, the way you explained it to me, the way you refused to do a Band-Aid fix even when I was pressuring you for a quick solution. That's exactly the kind of thinking I need. But I'd have to give up my garage. Leave my neighborhood? No, Jonathan interrupted. That's the beauty of it. I want you to stay exactly where you are. Keep running your garage, keep fixing cars for your neighbors. But spend 2 or 3 days a week working with struggling businesses, using the same diagnostic approach you use with engines. Marcus was intrigued despite his reservations. What kind of businesses? Small companies mostly. Family businesses that are struggling but don't know why. Restaurants that are losing money despite having good food. Retail stores that can't compete with big chains. Manufacturing companies that are hemorrhaging cash but can't figure out where it's going. Jonathan leaned forward eagerly. These are businesses that can't afford traditional consulting fees, but they desperately need someone who can look at their problems with fresh eyes. Someone who understands that cutting costs isn't always the answer, that sometimes you need to invest in fixing the real problem. And you think I can do that? I think you can learn to do that, Jonathan said. I think your approach to problem solving is exactly what these businesses need. And I think working with them would give you a different kind of satisfaction than you get from fixing cars, but a satisfaction that's just as real. Marcus sat back in his chair, trying to process the offer. What would this look like practically? You'd work with small business owners, spend time understanding their operations, identify what's really causing their problems, and develop solutions that address root causes instead of just symptoms. Think of it as preventive maintenance for businesses instead of cars. And I'd still keep my garage? Absolutely. In fact, I think staying connected to your community, continuing to work with your hands would make you better at the consulting work. You'd never lose sight of what real work looks like, what real people need. Jonathan paused, then added, the starting salary would be twice what you make now from the garage, and that's just for part-time work. If the division is successful, there would be opportunities for significant bonuses and eventually equity in the company. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the possibility. Part of him was excited by the challenge, but another part worried about leaving behind everything he knew. Can I think about it? Of course, Jonathan said. Take all the time you need. But Marcus, I hope you'll seriously consider it. I think you could help a lot of people, and I think you'd find the work rewarding in ways you might not expect. As they finished lunch, Marcus found himself looking at Jonathan Blackstone with completely different eyes than he had 3 weeks earlier. The arrogant CEO who had dismissed him as an incompetent mechanic had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely interested in creating something meaningful. Why are you doing this? Marcus asked as they prepared to leave. I mean, why change your whole business model? You said yourself that you're successful with the way things are now. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Because I realized that being successful and being right aren't the same thing. I've been successful by conventional measures, but I haven't been solving the right problems. I've been like a mechanic who keeps replacing fuel pumps without fixing the sensor that's causing them to fail. He smiled. Besides, I think there's more than one way to measure success. Maybe it's time I learned some of the ways you measure it. Marcus spent the next week wrestling with Jonathan's offer. The money was tempting, certainly more than he had ever imagined making. But it was the challenge that really intrigued him. The idea of using his problem-solving skills in a completely different way, of helping businesses the same way he helped his neighbors with their cars, appealed to something deep inside him. He talked it over with his sister Maria, who was now in her final semester of nursing school. They were sitting in the small apartment above the garage that had been their home since their father died. You should do it, Maria said without hesitation. Marcus, you're brilliant at figuring out problems. I've watched you diagnose car troubles. That stumped mechanics with decades more experience. Why wouldn't that work with other kinds of problems? But what if I fail? Marcus asked. What if I'm just a good mechanic and nothing more? Maria shook her head. Remember when Mrs. Rodriguez's son got in trouble at school? The counselors said he was just a troublemaker, but you figured out he was acting up because he couldn't see the blackboard clearly. You helped her get him glasses, and now he's on the honor roll. Marcus had forgotten about that incident. That was different. That was just common sense. No, that was problem solving, Maria insisted. You looked past the obvious symptom and found the real cause. That's what you do, Marcus. That's who you are. The next day, Marcus was changing oil on a customer's pickup truck when Mrs. Chen from the laundromat came over with a cup of tea and a worried expression. Marcus, can I ask your advice about something? She said. The laundromat is losing money, and I don't understand why. We have steady customers, but somehow I'm making less profit than I was 5 years ago. Marcus wiped his hands and accepted the tea gratefully. Mrs. Chen made the best jasmine tea in the neighborhood. What's changed? In the last 5 years? Well, the rent has gone up twice, and the cost of detergent and fabric softener keeps increasing. The city raised the minimum wage, so I'm paying my part-time helper more. But those are just normal business expenses, right? Marcus thought about it like he would approach a car problem. Those are symptoms, he said. Higher costs, lower profits. But what's the root cause? Are you charging the same prices you were charging 5 years ago? Mrs. Chen looked embarrassed. Well, yes. I don't want to make things harder for my customers. Most of them are struggling financially just like everyone else in the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen, if your costs have gone up but your prices haven't, you're essentially paying your customers to do their laundry, Marcus explained gently. That's not sustainable, but maybe there are ways to add value instead of just raising prices. He walked over to look at her laundromat through the window. It was clean but dated, with old machines and fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh. When was the last time you updated the machines? About 8 years ago, she admitted. The new ones are so expensive. But the new ones use less water and electricity, right? And they wash clothes faster? Marcus was thinking out loud now, the same way he did when diagnosing a tricky engine problem. What if you could offer faster service and cleaner clothes, while actually reducing your operating costs? Mrs. Chen's eyes lit up with understanding. You mean the new machines would pay for themselves over time? Exactly. And while you're upgrading, maybe add some amenities. Free Wi-Fi so people can work while they wait. A coffee station, better lighting. Make it a place people want to spend time instead of just a chore they have to endure. But the investment would be less than what you'll lose if you keep operating at a loss, Marcus pointed out. And there are probably small business loans available for equipment upgrades. Mrs. Chen hugged him impulsively. You should be a business consultant, Marcus. You see things so clearly. After she left, Marcus stood in his garage thinking about the conversation. He had just done exactly what Jonathan had described, looked past the obvious symptoms to find the underlying problem, and suggested a solution that addressed the root cause rather than just the immediate issue. That evening, Marcus called Jonathan. I've been thinking about your offer, he said without preamble. And? Jonathan's voice was carefully neutral. I want to try it, but I have conditions. I'm listening. First, I keep the garage exactly like it is. I don't want to change anything about how I work with my regular customers. Agreed. Second, I want to start with businesses in my own neighborhood, places like Mrs. Chen's laundromat, the corner grocery store, the family restaurant 2 blocks over. I want to help the people I know first. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. That's not exactly what I had in mind initially, but actually that's brilliant. Start local, prove the concept works, then expand. Yes, I like that approach. Third, I don't want an office in some downtown tower. I want to work out of my garage. If business owners want to hire me, they can come here just like any other customer. That's unusual, but I can see the logic in it. It would certainly make the service more accessible to small businesses. And finally, Marcus continued, I want to be able to turn down any client that I don't think I can help, for any reason, without having to justify it to corporate executives. Done, Jonathan said immediately. Marcus, I think you understand what I'm trying to build better than I do. When can you start? 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself sitting across from Tommy Nguyen, the owner of the corner convenience store. Tommy was explaining how his profits had been declining for the past year, despite steady customer traffic. The big grocery store chain opened a location 6 blocks away, Tommy explained. I can't compete with their prices on most items. People still come here for convenience, but they're buying less. Marcus nodded, listening carefully. What do people buy from you that they can't get at the big chain store? Well, mostly small items they need right away. Milk when they run out, bread, cigarettes, lottery tickets, and I stay open later than they do. So you're not really competing with them on price, Marcus observed. You're providing a different service entirely, convenience and availability. I guess so, but that doesn't help my bottom line. Marcus spent the next hour walking through the store with Tommy, observing customer interactions and asking questions. He noticed that people often came in looking for specific items that Tommy didn't carry, and that the store's layout made it hard to find things quickly. Here's what I see, Marcus said finally. Your customers aren't coming here to save money. They're coming here to save time. But your store isn't optimized for speed and convenience. Over the next month, Marcus worked with Tommy to reorganize the store layout, stock items that customers frequently requested, and add services like package pickup for online orders. They installed better lighting and clearer signage, and Tommy started staying open an hour later on weekends. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were effective. Within 6 weeks, Tommy's daily revenue had increased by 20%, and customer satisfaction surveys showed marked improvement. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. The owner of the family restaurant asked Marcus to help figure out why their dinner business was struggling. The barber shop wanted to understand why they were losing younger customers. Even Mrs. Chen officially hired him to help plan her laundromat renovation. Each case was different, but Marcus found that his approach remained consistent. Listen carefully. Observe everything. Look for the underlying causes rather than just the obvious symptoms, and focus on solutions that addressed root problems rather than quick fixes. 3 months after starting his consulting work, Marcus received a call from Jonathan. "I've been getting reports from Sarah about your work," Jonathan said. "I have to admit I'm impressed. The success rate you're achieving with these small businesses is remarkable." "They're good people with good businesses," Marcus replied. "They just needed someone to help them see their problems differently." "Well, I have a proposition for you. There's a mid-sized manufacturing company about an hour outside the city. They're family-owned, been in business for 40 years, but they're struggling to stay profitable. The owners are considering selling to a larger corporation or just shutting down entirely. What do they manufacture? Specialized automotive parts. High-quality stuff, but they're losing contracts to cheaper, overseas competitors. The traditional consulting approach would be to recommend massive layoffs and outsourcing production, but I think there might be another way." Marcus felt his interest peak. "You want me to take a look?" "I want you to do what you do best," Jonathan said. "Diagnose the real problem and see if there's a way to fix it that doesn't involve destroying everything the family has built." "Set up the meeting," Marcus said. "But they come here. If they want my help, they can see how I work." 6 months after Marcus began his consulting work, the small garage that had once seemed too humble for a Ferrari had become an unlikely hub of business innovation. The waiting area that used to hold only car magazines now also contained business, plans, financial reports, and success stories from the dozens of small businesses Marcus had helped transform. The manufacturing company Jonathan had referred turned out to be Marcus's biggest challenge yet. Peterson Manufacturing had been making specialized transmission components for 40 years, but they were losing contracts to cheaper competitors who could undercut their prices by 30%. The family that owned the company was preparing to sell to a corporate buyer who planned to move production overseas and lay off most of the workforce. When Robert Peterson and his daughter Jennifer first visited Marcus's garage, they looked as skeptical as Jonathan had 6 months earlier. Here they were, discussing the future of a $40 million company in a place that smelled of motor oil and had a calendar featuring vintage muscle cars on the wall. But Marcus had learned to use his environment to his advantage. The humble setting put people at ease, made them more willing to share their real problems instead of hiding behind corporate jargon. "Tell me about your customers," Marcus had said, ignoring the financial statements they'd brought. "Not the numbers, the actual people who buy your parts," Jennifer answered first. "Mostly automotive manufacturers and aftermarket suppliers. They use our transmission components in everything from sports cars to heavy-duty trucks." "And why do they choose your parts over the cheaper alternatives?" Robert leaned forward. "Quality. Our failure rate is less than 1%. The overseas competitors claim similar quality, but their actual performance in the field tells a different story." "So your customers know your parts are better?" "The engineers do," Jennifer said. "But the purchasing departments only see the price difference." Marcus nodded, recognizing the pattern. The people who understand the value aren't the people making the buying decisions. Over the next month, Marcus spent time at Peterson Manufacturing, observing their operations and talking to employees. What he found was a company that had built its reputation on solving difficult engineering problems, but had never learned how to communicate that value effectively to customers. The solution Marcus proposed was counterintuitive. Instead of competing on price, Peterson Manufacturing would position itself as a premium problem-solving partner. They would offer extended warranties, on-site technical support, and custom engineering services that the overseas competitors couldn't match. "You're not selling parts," Marcus explained to the Peterson family. "You're selling peace of mind. You're selling the confidence that comes from working with people who understand your specific challenges and can solve problems before they become catastrophic failures." The strategy worked better than anyone expected. Within 4 months, Peterson Manufacturing had signed 3 new contracts with premium pricing that more than offset the business they'd lost to cheaper competitors. They hired back laid-off workers and began investing in new equipment. The success of the Peterson project caught the attention of business media. A reporter from the regional business journal wrote a feature article about the car mechanic who's revolutionizing small business consulting. The article mentioned Marcus's innovative diagnostic approach and his unusual office location. A week after the article was published, Marcus was working on a customer's transmission when a familiar red Ferrari pulled up outside his garage. But this time, Jonathan wasn't alone. He was accompanied by two other people in expensive cars, a black BMW and a silver Mercedes. Jonathan got out with a broad smile on his face. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet some people." The woman from the BMW introduced herself as Linda Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries, a regional manufacturing conglomerate. The man from the Mercedes was David Kim, who owned a chain of restaurants throughout the state. "We've been hearing about your work," Linda said. "Jonathan has been telling everyone about his unconventional consultant who works out of a garage and solves problems that stump traditional business advisors." "The Peterson manufacturing turnaround was impressive," David added. "We'd like to discuss some challenges we're facing in our organizations." Marcus looked at the three successful executives standing in his modest garage, then at the customer's car he'd been working on. "I appreciate the interest, but I'm not sure I'm what you're looking for. I work with small businesses, family operations, neighborhood stores. You probably need someone with more corporate experience." "Actually," Jonathan said, "I think you're exactly what we need. Linda's company is struggling with employee retention despite offering competitive salaries. David's restaurants are losing market share to fast casual chains. These are complex problems that traditional consultants have failed to solve." "But your operations are huge compared to what I've been working with," Marcus protested. Linda stepped forward. "Size doesn't matter if you're asking the wrong questions. From what I understand, your approach is to look at the underlying causes rather than just the symptoms. That's exactly what we need." Over the next few months, Marcus found himself working with increasingly large and complex organizations. Linda's employee retention problem turned out to be caused by micromanagement policies that made talented people feel untrusted and undervalued. David's restaurants were losing customers because they had lost touch with what made them special in the first place. The personal connection and community feeling that chain restaurants couldn't replicate. In each case, Marcus's solutions were elegantly simple once the real problems were identified. Linda's company implemented flexible work policies and gave managers training in trust-based leadership. David's restaurants brought back locally sourced ingredients and community events that reminded customers why they had fallen in love with the places originally. The success stories multiplied, and Marcus's reputation grew. But he never moved out of his garage, never stopped working on cars for his neighbors, never lost sight of what had made him effective in the first place. One evening, as Marcus was closing up the garage after a particularly long day, Jonathan stopped by for what had become a regular weekly check-in. "I have something for you," Jonathan said, handing Marcus an envelope. "It's a formal partnership agreement. I want to make you a full partner in Blackstone Industries, with equity and a seat on the board of directors." Marcus opened the envelope and looked at the financial terms. The numbers were staggering, more money than he had ever imagined having. "This is generous, Jonathan, but I'm not sure it's what I want." Jonathan looked surprised. "Why not? You've earned it. Your division is now the most profitable part of the company." Marcus set the envelope down on his workbench. "Because I don't want to become something I'm not. The reason this works is because I understand the problems my clients face. I understand them because I live in the same world they do. If I become a millionaire partner in a consulting firm, I stop being the person who can see what they can't see." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. "So what do you want?" "I want to keep doing exactly what I'm doing," Marcus said. "I want to help small businesses solve problems. I want to work on cars. I want to live in this neighborhood with these people. That's who I am. But the money's nice," Marcus acknowledged. "But it's not why I do this. I do it because it feels like I'm making a real difference in people's lives. Mrs. Chen's laundromat is thriving. Tommy's store is busier than ever. The Peterson family saved their company and kept 200 people employed. That's worth more than any partnership agreement." Jonathan smiled. "You know, 6 months ago, I would have thought you were crazy for turning down this offer. Now I think you're the smartest person I know." He picked up the envelope. "What if we structure it differently? What if you stay exactly where you are, keep working exactly the way you want to work, but we set up a foundation that helps small businesses access your consulting services. We fund it through the profits from the larger corporate clients so neighborhood businesses can afford the help they need." Marcus felt something click into place, like the final piece of a complex diagnostic puzzle. That could work. That could really work. As Jonathan left that evening, Marcus stood in the doorway of his garage looking out at his neighborhood. The street lights were coming on, and he could see families gathering for dinner in the apartments above the shops. Mrs. Chen was closing up the laundromat, and Tommy was helping an elderly customer carry groceries to her car. His phone buzzed, with a text message from his sister Maria, who had graduated nursing school and was now working at the community health clinic. "Proud of you, big brother. Dad would be proud too." Marcus smiled and went back inside to finish the transmission repair he'd been working on. Tomorrow he had a meeting with a family bakery that was struggling to compete with a big chain store that had opened nearby. It was the kind of problem he was getting good at solving, not by changing who his clients were, but by helping them remember who they had always been.